Have you ever felt something inside you break at the very moment you were supposed to feel the most pleasure? I'm not talking about the heart. I'm talking about something deeper, darker. That exact second when desire mixes with fear, and you realize you control nothing. You shiver, not only because of the skin you touch, but because of what that skin awakens within you. Tell me, what really happens when a man is left without his masks, when he stops acting and faces his own reflection in the middle of the most intimate act that exists? You don't admit it, but you know it. You've felt that inner voice whispering between moans and breaths. Who are you now? That question doesn't come from outside. It's born from your shadow, the part of you that stays silent, hidden behind the character you show the world. That mask you call me. And when the body surrenders, the shadow awakens. You are no longer the confident lover or the conqueror. You are a lost child, an exposed man, a being divided between desire and the fear of disappearing inside the other. I promise you this. If you stay until the end of this video, you'll understand why true intimacy isn't about bodies, but about identities. Why sex, in its deepest form, is not a physical act. It's a confrontation between your oldest fears and your desperate need to be seen. You'll understand why that trembling you deny, that vertigo right before surrendering, isn't weakness, but the call of your soul wanting to be recognized. And when you understand that, you'll stop fearing vulnerability, because you'll discover there's nothing more powerful than being seen completely naked, even in what no one else can see. There's a moment, right after climax, when silence becomes unbearable. There are no heavy breaths, no sweet words, not even clear thoughts, just a strange feeling, as if something had broken or awakened. That emptiness isn't physical, it's psychological. It's the shadow reclaiming its space, demanding to be heard. In that instant, the man stops being a lover and becomes a child again, only this time there's no refuge to run to. What he feels isn't pleasure or guilt, it's confrontation. His soul has just seen itself reflected in another's skin, and what it saw doesn't always please him. Because intimacy, true intimacy, isn't about undressing the body, but about undressing the mind. And when that happens, echoes of everything he tried to bury appear. Insecurity, fear of not being enough, the anxiety of losing control. Jung said that everything not made conscious manifests as fate, and that's where the man begins to understand that it isn't women, or sex, or love that torments him, but his own disconnection from himself. Each encounter is a reminder of what he hasn't resolved, an emotional mirror where his masks shatter without warning. Many try to silence that echo with repetition. They seek more bodies, more nights, more intensity, as if excess could calm absence. But the shadow doesn't feed on pleasure, it feeds on truth. And the more you ignore it, the louder it gets. It begins as discomfort after the act, but over time it turns into existential emptiness. That feeling of not knowing who you are when no one desires you. Modern man confuses desire with identity, and that's why he feels lost when desire fades. He doesn't understand that what he truly seeks isn't sex, but meaning. And here comes the cruelest paradox. The more he tries to fill that void with pleasure, the further he drifts from himself. Because sex without consciousness may excite the body, but it leaves the soul starving. The man who doesn't know himself turns intimacy into a stage, a theater where he performs his best version. But every applause is fake, every moan a lie that reinforces his loneliness. Only when he dares to look without masks does the act become an encounter. And that encounter isn't always with the other person. Sometimes it's with the abyss itself. There are men who, after a seemingly perfect night, feel the urge to walk away, to flee without reason. They don't know it, but what frightens them isn't her. It's what she awakened. Vulnerability. The fact that, for an instant, they stopped being characters and became something real. And reality hurts, because it can't hide behind the ego. That's the part almost no one confesses. That in bed, we don't just seek bodies, we seek answers. Every touch is a silent prayer begging to belong, to be seen, to be accepted without conditions. But the acceptance that costs the most isn't the others. It's one's own. That's why sex can be as disturbing as it is healing. Because when you live it consciously, it undresses your soul too. And that isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's violent, chaotic, almost unbearable, but necessary. Because true. Growth doesn't come when you conquer bodies, but when you understand which part of you is trying to conquer them. When you stop using pleasure as a disguise and turn it into a bridge toward your own truth. Then everything changes. The body stops being a tool of power and becomes a language that doesn't need words to say, I see you and I see myself in you. There, in that shared vulnerability, the man discovers something he can't learn from books or therapy. That authentic intimacy isn't about possession, but surrender. That love, in the end, isn't about domination or protection, but accepting the chaos both carry inside. And when he understands that, he no longer fears the silence after pleasure, because he knows that silence isn't emptiness. It's his shadow's voice reminding him he's alive. There's something no one dares to say out loud. That deep down, man fears love more than failure. Because love disarms him. It strips away his control, tears out his certainties, and leaves him face to face with a vulnerability he doesn't know how to handle. That's why many confuse desire with love, because desire can be managed, turned on and off, even faked. But love can't be faked. It undresses you without asking permission. It forces you to reveal your cracks, your half-healed wounds, your most primitive parts. And when it comes, it doesn't strike the body. It strikes the ego. In the silence after the act, when everything seems calm, something invisible begins to move. It's the soul trying to reorganize itself after chaos. Because every intimate encounter, though it may not seem so, is a kind of death. Yes, death. Death of the character you were, the role you played, the image you tried to hold on to while desire devoured you. That small death, that emptiness afterward, is nothing more than the signal that something inside you has been shed. And the more aware you are, the more you feel it. What once was only pleasure now becomes revelation. The man who dares to look at what that silence shows him begins to notice a subtle change. His way of touching, of breathing, of looking stops being a desperate search for validation and turns into presence. He no longer seeks to be admired. He seeks to understand. He no longer fears giving himself. He fears not giving himself completely. And then he understands that intimacy isn't an external conquest, but an internal reconciliation. The flesh is only the vehicle, but the destination is the soul. And something fascinating happens here. When the man allows himself to feel without fear, the body becomes a mirror of his evolution. Every gesture becomes a symbol. Every contact, a silent dialogue between his light and his darkness. Sex stops being a battle of power and becomes a rite of self-knowledge. In that moment, pleasure is no longer measured by intensity but by depth. He no longer seeks ecstasy as escape, but as encounter. But there's something even darker. When man awakens to this level of awareness, he begins to perceive something he once ignored. Energy. His, hers, the one that merges, the one that flows through him beyond his control. He understands that every union is not just physical, but energetic. That every contact leaves a trace, an invisible mark that clings to his unconscious. Jung would call it soul transference. You don't see it, but you feel it. There are presences that stay with you long after they're gone. That's why there are people you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. It wasn't their body that trapped you. It was their energy that touched your shadow. And that shadow, once touched, changes. The man begins to perceive desire as something sacred, not as an impulse to dominate, but as an ancestral language between his unconscious and the universe. And that discovery is as powerful as it is dangerous, because it confronts him with a brutal truth. Sex was never the end. It was the means. The means to reconcile with what he's denied his whole life, his sensitivity, his tenderness, his fear. And that's where true awakening begins. Because when man understands that intimacy is the bridge between his animality and his divinity, he stops fearing love. He no longer chases it. He honors it. He no longer tries to control desire. He learns to listen to it. And then something changes forever. Sex ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a space of communion, of acceptance, of surrender. And even though the world keeps teaching him that strength lies in not feeling, he already knows. True strength isn't in control, but in holding what you feel without running away, in looking the shadow in the eye and saying, "I see you, and still I'm here." Because that, and only that, is the moment when a man stops being a prisoner of his desire and begins to own himself. But there's something even more unsettling. Something most men never dare to face. The feeling that after every encounter, a part of them dissolves a little more. As if some piece of their identity lingers in the air, stuck to the other person. It's not fantasy. It's the consequence of having shared more than skin. In every union, the man gives invisible fragments of his story, his energy, his unconscious. And when those parts don't return, unease begins. They call it emptiness, but it's emotional disintegration. He hasn't lost someone. He's lost something of himself. That's why many feel tired after pleasure. Not physically, but existentially. Because what they've given isn't just body, it's memory. Every caress is a silent exchange between two souls, a symbolic transfer that leaves traces where certainty once lived. The problem is no one taught us to manage that energy. We were raised to perform in bed, not to understand what happens when the soul opens. That's why the modern man is exhausted, overflowing with stimuli yet empty of meaning. He thinks he's lived much, but in truth he's only repeated the same pattern again and again, seeking connection without facing the price of connecting. And the price is high, because connection means losing part of your control. It means letting the other see your darkness, your need, your most primitive side. It means accepting that for a few seconds, you're not the protagonist, but a channel through which something far greater flows. And that's terrifying, because man fears being absorbed. He fears disappearing into emotion. That's why so many prefer emotional distance disguised as freedom, when in reality it's fear of internal collapse. Yet there's something fascinating in that collapse. When the ego breaks, a deeper consciousness emerges. It's as if the soul takes advantage of the crack to breathe. And in that breath, the man realizes something chilling. That he isn't seeking pleasure, he's seeking redemption. That every time he gives himself, he's trying to cleanse an ancient guilt, to heal a wound he doesn't remember. Perhaps sex, in its purest form, is exactly that. A way to reconcile with who we were before we learned to be afraid. And then the change begins. He no longer seeks intensity. He seeks authenticity. He no longer asks if he did it right, but if it was real. Because when the act becomes conscious, every touch carries weight, every glance has a meaning. It's the moment when desire stops being an escape and becomes a return to the essential, to the human, to what doesn't need to prove anything. And that return isn't pleasurable, it's revealing. Because in it, the man discovers that true intimacy isn't measured by orgasms, but by how much of himself he dared to show without pretending. But there's an even deeper revelation. Man doesn't fear rejection of his body, he fears rejection of his soul. That's why he acts, performs, exaggerates, because he's terrified of being seen in his truth and not being enough. Yet real love begins right there, where fear can no longer sustain the disguise. When he allows himself to be seen in his fragility, something within him is set free. He stops fighting his nature, stops hiding his tenderness behind hardness. He understands that desire isn't the enemy of love, but its messenger. That the body is the means, but the soul is the purpose. And when that understanding settles, sex ceases to be an experience that consumes you and becomes one that transforms you. Because every time a man gives himself consciously, he doesn't just touch another body, he touches his own truth. And that contact, however brief, however fleeting, leaves a mark that pushes him to evolve. It forces him to rebuild from within, to redefine what it means to be a man, not as strength, not as control, but as presence. The presence of someone who no longer fears feeling, who no longer flees from the abyss, because he has learned that the abyss can also be home. And perhaps that's the true secret of intimacy. It's not about finding someone who completes you, but daring to lose yourself to find yourself in another. Because only when you strip away what you thought you were can you discover who you truly are, when there are no masks, no noise, no fear, only you, breathing in the dark, and finally at peace. And if you've made it this far, you might start to feel something different. Not in the words, but in what you're feeling right now. A kind of calm discomfort, an inner vibration, as if something inside you were shifting. It's no coincidence. You've been listening about desire, shadow, vulnerability. But what you've just experienced is a mirror. Everything you felt during this video wasn't just reflection. It was recognition. You weren't looking outward, you were looking at yourself. And that, though it may not seem so, is dangerous. Because once you've seen your own shadow, you can't unsee it. You can no longer take refuge in the idea that sex is just a game, that intimacy is just skin. Because now you know, every encounter is a door, and every door leads you closer or further from yourself. From this point on, you won't be able to pretend you don't understand why you feel empty after pleasure, or why some people leave marks that don't fade. You know because you felt it. And that knowledge, though it burns, is the beginning of your freedom. But be careful, because freedom doesn't arrive with euphoria. It arrives with silence. It's that moment when you no longer need to act, prove, or hide. When you can look someone in the eyes and not need to say anything, because you understand that what mattered was never conquering bodies, but finding yourself within the contact. Conscious sex doesn't promise eternal pleasure. It promises truth. And truth, when accepted, strips your lies without anesthesia. And maybe, if you've made it to the end, it's because something inside you was ready to hear it. Because you're tired of masks, of noise, of the pressure to be enough. Because you finally realized that true masculinity isn't in control, but in the courage to feel. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. So if this video stirred something in you, if it made you think or feel uncomfortable, that means you're alive, that something inside you is awakening. I want you to write in the comments one single phrase, the one that resonates with you most right now. Don't overthink it. It can be a word, a feeling, a confession. Write it and leave it there. Sometimes writing is another way to release what we silence. And if this journey made you look within, subscribe, not because you want more videos, but because here you'll find more of what the world avoids showing you. The raw part, the honest part, the human part. And now, close your eyes. Breathe. Feel the weight of your body, the silence between your thoughts. Imagine you're standing before yourself, completely naked, without names, without titles, without history. Look at yourself. Don't run. What you see isn't weakness, it's truth. And truth, though it hurts, always sets you free. Thank you for staying until the end. You don't need to understand it all, just feel it. Because if you've made it this far, you're no longer the same as when you started this video. You've seen your shadow. And that, even if the world doesn't understand it, is the first step to being real again. I'll see you in the next one, if you still dare to look within.